Thunder split the October sky as two small children stood locked outside in freezing rain, their tiny fists pounding against glass that wouldn't open, while inside, a woman in red watched without moving. Emma's lips were turning blue. Daniel tried to shield his sister with his small body, the way he'd seen grown-ups do when bad things happened. They weren't crying anymore. Crying never changed anything. Grace heard the pounding first. She was folding white sheets in the upstairs hallway when the sound cut through the storm, desperate, rhythmic, breaking. Her hands froze mid-fold. Through the rain-streaked window, she saw them, Emma, 4 years old, pressed against the terrace door in her yellow sundress, now plastered to her shivering frame. Daniel, 5, standing behind her, his red shirt soaked black, his small arms wrapped around his sister's shoulders. Their mouths formed words Grace couldn't hear over the thunder. "Help us. Please. Let us in." Grace's heart stopped when she looked past them, through the glass, into the house. Celeste stood on the other side of the locked door, arms crossed over her fitted red dress, phone in one hand. Watching. Not moving. Just watching two motherless children drown in rain that fell like judgment. Subscribe now so you don't miss what happens next. Comment below, where are you watching from? Grace dropped the sheets and ran. Her footsteps echoed through the marble hallways like gunshots. She took the stairs 3 at a time, her blue uniform catching on the banister. Behind her, abandoned linen scattered like snow. When she reached the terrace door, Celeste blocked her path. The fiancé, 34 years old, magazine perfect, diamond engagement ring catching light, didn't flinch. "Mr. Ashford put me in charge when he's working. The children tracked mud on my white carpet. They need to learn consequences." Grace looked at the woman. Then at Emma, whose small hand was still pressed against the glass, fingers spread wide like a starfish. Then at Daniel, who'd stopped pounding and now stood perfectly still, the way children do when hope dies. "Step aside," Grace whispered, her voice carrying every motherless child she'd ever known, "or I will move you myself." Something in Grace's eyes made Celeste hesitate. The 28-year-old maid was smaller, quieter, easily dismissed. But right now, she looked like thunder given human form. Celeste stepped back. Grace's hands shook as she turned the lock. The door opened. Emma collapsed into Grace's arms first, her small body convulsing with cold. Daniel followed, silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. Grace wrapped them both in her own body, trying to transfer warmth through uniform fabric and desperate prayer. Water pooled beneath them on Celeste's precious white carpet. "Get towels," Grace commanded. Celeste didn't move. "Now." "You're fired," Celeste said, turning toward the stairs. "I'll tell Victor you assaulted me." Grace didn't respond. She was already carrying Emma, guiding Daniel with her free hand, moving toward the warmth of the kitchen. Behind them, Celeste's heels clicked away, toward Victor's study, toward his deaf ears and blind eyes. In the kitchen, Grace stripped the children's soaked clothes with shaking hands. Emma's skin was ice. Daniel's lips had lost all color. She wrapped them in dish towels, nothing else was close enough, and pulled them against the warmth of her body. The industrial stove blazed nearby. Slowly, color returned to their faces. "How long?" Grace asked Daniel. The boy understood what she meant. 20 minutes, he whispered. "Maybe more." "We knocked the whole time." Grace closed her eyes. 20 minutes. In October rain that fell like February. She thought of Emma's mother, Victor's late wife, Rebecca, who died 18 months ago, her body surrendering to cancer on a Tuesday morning that took all the warmth from this house. Rebecca, who'd held Grace's hand in those final days and whispered, "If he forgets how to see them, promise me you'll remember for him." Grace had promised. And now she understood what Rebecca had known, what dying mothers always know, that grief makes men blind, and desperate men make dangerous choices. "I'm cold, Grace," Emma whispered against her chest. The little girl's voice cracked on the word cold, and something in Grace's heart cracked with it. "I know, baby. I know." She carried them upstairs to Emma's room, the one that still had her mother's paintings on the walls, the one Celeste kept threatening to remove. Grace ran a bath, warm but not hot, testing the temperature 3 times with her elbow the way Rebecca had taught her. She lowered Emma in first, then Daniel. They sat together in the water, not playing, just existing. Grace knelt beside the tub and washed Emma's hair with gentle hands. The little girl's eyes stayed closed. "Mama used to sing when it rained," Emma said suddenly. Her voice was small, distant. She said rain was just the sky being sad, and singing made it feel better. Grace's throat closed. "Your mama was right. Does Daddy forget her too?" The question hung in the steam-filled air like an accusation. Grace's hand stilled in Emma's hair. She opened her mouth to answer, to defend Victor, to explain that grief takes different shapes, but the words wouldn't come. Because she feared the answer was yes. Downstairs, 3 floors below, Victor Ashford sat in his oak-paneled study, signing acquisition papers for a company he didn't need. At 52, he owned 17 office buildings, 3 hotels, and a pharmaceutical empire worth billions. He owned everything except the ability to look his own children in the eye without seeing their mother's face staring back. So he worked. And while he worked, his children nearly froze. Grace dressed Emma and Daniel in warm pajamas, tucked them into Emma's bed together. Daniel held his sister the way he'd held her in the rain, protective, resigned, too old for 5 years. Grace sat beside them, her hand on Daniel's back, feeling his small lungs expand and contract. "Grace?" Daniel's voice was barely audible. "Is she going to be our new mom?" Grace knew who he meant. "Would you want that?" Daniel's silence was answer enough. After a moment, he whispered, "She doesn't like us." "I know. Why does Daddy want to marry someone who doesn't like us?" Grace had no answer that wouldn't break them further. So she did what Rebecca used to do, she told them the truth. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes because they're scared of being alone. "Your daddy loved your mama so much that losing her broke something inside him. He's trying to fix it the wrong way. Can you fix him?" Emma asked, her eyes finally opening. They were her mother's eyes, gray-blue, depthless, seeing too much. "I don't know, sweetheart. But I'm going to try." Emma nodded, satisfied. Within minutes, both children slept, their breathing synchronized, their small bodies curled together like quotation marks around an unfinished sentence. Grace stood slowly, her knees aching from kneeling on the hardwood floor. She turned to leave and stopped. Emma's closet door was open a crack. Inside, something white caught the light. Grace opened the door wider. Drawings. Dozens of them, maybe more, stacked in careful piles and taped to the closet's interior walls. All the same image, repeated with small variations, a woman with long dark hair and wings spread wide, reaching down toward 2 small figures who reached back. In every drawing, the woman was smiling. In every drawing, the children were crying. Grace's vision blurred. She pressed her fist against her mouth to keep the sound in. Emma had been drawing her dead mother every day for 18 months, hiding the evidence where Celeste wouldn't find it and throw it away. Where Victor wouldn't see it and break further. Don't miss what happens when the truth comes out. Subscribe and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We want to hear from you. Grace closed the closet door gently and walked into the hallway. She stood there for a long moment, listening to the rain hammer the roof, making her decision. Then she walked downstairs toward Victor's study. Her hand didn't shake when she knocked. When he called, "Come in," without looking up from his papers, Grace opened the door and stepped into the warm light of his self-imposed prison. "Mr. Ashford," she said quietly. He still didn't look up. "Your children waited in the rain for 20 minutes today." Victor's pen stopped moving. His hand froze mid-signature. Slowly, very slowly, he raised his head. His face, handsome once, now carved by grief into something harder, went completely white. "What?" The word came out strangled. "Miss Celeste locked them outside on the terrace. In the storm. I found them and let them in." Grace's voice remained steady, but her hands twisted in her uniform. Emma's lips were blue. Daniel wouldn't speak for 10 minutes. Victor stood so fast his chair tipped backward and crashed to the floor. Papers scattered. The sound echoed like breaking bones. "Where are they?" "Asleep. In Emma's room. They're safe now." "Now." Victor's voice rose. "Now. Where the hell was I?" Grace didn't answer. They both knew where he'd been. The same place he'd been every night for 18 months, hiding in work, drowning in numbers, anywhere but present. Victor pushed past her, running for the stairs. Grace followed more slowly. She reached Emma's doorway just as Victor knelt beside the bed, his hand hovering over Daniel's sleeping face, not quite touching, as if afraid he'd break something already shattered. Emma stirred. Her eyes opened, found her father, and something in them shifted, not quite trust, but the memory of trust. "Daddy? I'm here, baby. I'm so sorry. I'm here." "The mean lady locked us outside," Emma whispered. "But Grace saved us. Grace always saves us." Victor's shoulders shook. He pressed his forehead against the edge of Emma's mattress, and Grace saw tears darken the pink sheets. She backed away quietly, giving him privacy for his breaking. But as she turned to leave, Daniel spoke, his voice cutting through the dark like a knife. "Daddy, why do you love her more than us?" Grace stopped breathing. Victor's head snapped up. "What?" Daniel sat up slowly, his small face older than it should be, ancient with grief no child should carry. "Miss Celeste. You love her more than us. That's why you let her be mean." "No." Victor's voice cracked. "No, Daniel, You do." Daniel's matter-of-fact tone was worse than anger. "It's okay. Mama's gone and you need somebody. Grace said so. It's okay if you forget us." The sound that came from Victor wasn't quite human. He reached for his son, pulled both children against his chest, and held them like he was drowning and they were air. "I will never forget you. Never. Do you hear me? You are everything. You are all I have left of her. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry." Grace left them there, father and children, broken pieces trying to fit back together. She walked downstairs through the silent mansion, past the white carpet with its faint muddy footprints, evidence of small crimes and smaller mercies. In the kitchen, she found Celeste waiting, phone in hand, perfectly composed. "I've called Victor's lawyer," Celeste said calmly. "You assaulted me and overstepped your position. You're fired, effective immediately." Grace looked at the woman who'd locked children in freezing rain, who'd weaponized cold against the motherless, who saw diamonds where others saw hearts. "No," Grace said quietly. "I'm not." "Excuse me." "You heard me." Grace pulled out her own phone. "I have doorbell camera footage of those children pounding on the glass. I have timestamps. I have photos of Emma's blue lips. And I have 18 months of watching you treat those babies like inconveniences. She stepped closer. You want to call lawyers? Call them. See who they believe, the fiancée who's been here 8 months, or the woman who held their mother's hand while she died. Celeste's perfect face finally cracked. Victor will choose me. Men always do. Maybe, Grace said. But not tonight. Upstairs, in Emma's room, Victor held his children and whispered promises he prayed he could keep. The rain continued to fall. And in the closet full of drawings, a paper mother with paper wings watched over paper children, reaching down, always reaching, never quite touching, the way ghosts do when they love the living too much to leave. But downstairs in the kitchen, Grace stood her ground, alive and present and refusing to let go. Because she'd made a promise to a dying woman. And unlike the ghosts, Grace could still fight. Emma, curled against her father's chest, whispered one more question before sleep took her, Daddy, does Mama know we miss her? Victor's answer came through tears, yes, baby. She knows. She's always known. In the closet, the paper mother smiled. Outside, the storm raged. And somewhere between heaven and earth, Rebecca Ashford watched her family begin, finally, to heal. But healing is slow, and some wounds need more than love to close. By morning, everything would change again. Because Grace had evidence. And Celeste had secrets. And Victor had a choice to make that would determine whether his children ever trusted him again. The rain knew. It always knows. That's why it falls like tears, because the sky understands what people take too long to learn. That some doors should never be locked, some cold should never be weaponized, and some children should never have to beg to come home. Thunder rolled one last time, shaking the mansion to its foundation. And in that sound, for those who knew how to listen, was a warning, the storm had only just begun. Morning came without mercy. Victor woke on the floor beside Emma's bed, his back screaming, his neck twisted at an angle that made standing an exercise in controlled agony. Gray light filtered through curtains he didn't remember closing. Both children still slept, tangled together like roots that had grown around each other for survival. He stood slowly, joints popping, and looked at them properly for the first time in months. Daniel's face bore faint shadows under his eyes, the kind that come from too many nights lying awake. Emma's thumb rested near her mouth, not quite touching, as if even in sleep she denied herself comfort. When had they learned to be so small? So quiet? So invisible in their own home? Victor backed out of the room and nearly collided with Grace in the hallway. She held a tray with toast and juice, children's portions, cut into shapes his late wife used to make. Stars for Emma. Dinosaurs for Daniel. The sight of those familiar shapes carved by unfamiliar hands broke something loose in his chest. How long have you been doing this? He asked, voice raw. 18 months, Grace said simply. Since the funeral. The truth of it settled like concrete in his stomach. While he'd been signing papers and avoiding mirrors, Grace had been cutting toast into dinosaurs. While he'd been choosing a new wife, Grace had been mothering his children. While he'd been anywhere but here, Grace had been everywhere that mattered. Thank you, he whispered. Grace's expression didn't soften. Don't thank me. Fix it. She brushed past him into Emma's room. Victor stood alone in the hallway, listening to her wake the children with gentle words and laughter that didn't sound forced. He turned toward his own bedroom, toward Celeste, and found his feet wouldn't move in that direction. Instead, he descended the curved staircase, one hand on the marble banister his wife had chosen, and made his way to the kitchen. Coffee was already brewing. Grace's doing, probably. Everything good in this house seemed to be Grace's doing lately. The kitchen was empty. Peaceful. Victor poured coffee into a mug that said, "World's Best Dad, a Father's Day gift from 2 years ago, when Rebecca was still alive and that title still felt earned." Now it felt like evidence of fraud. He was halfway through his first sip when Celeste appeared in the doorway, immaculate despite the early hour. Her red silk robe looked like blood in the morning light. "We need to talk about the maid," she said without preamble. "Like and subscribe, you won't believe what she says next." Victor set down his mug carefully. "Her name is Grace. I don't care what her name is. She assaulted me yesterday. She threatened me. She needs to go." Something cold and ancient moved through Victor's chest. He studied the woman he'd proposed to 3 months ago, the woman who'd seemed like salvation, like a second chance, like proof that life could continue after death. Now she looked like a stranger wearing a familiar face. "Tell me exactly what happened yesterday," he said quietly. Celeste's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "Excuse me? Tell me. From the beginning. What happened with my children and the rain?" A muscle twitched in Celeste's jaw. "They tracked mud on my white carpet. I told them to stay outside until they learn to respect other people's property. It's called discipline, Victor. Something they desperately need." "How long?" "What? How long were they outside?" His voice remained steady, but his hands had begun to shake. He pressed them flat against the counter. "I don't know. 20 minutes. It wasn't that cold." "It was 43 degrees, Victor said. The rain was 38 degrees. Emma is 4 years old. Her core body temperature was 94 degrees when Grace found her. Do you know what hypothermia is, Celeste?" The color drained from Celeste's face, but she recovered quickly. "You're being dramatic. Children are resilient. You're coddling them." Victor laughed. A sound without humor, sharp as breaking glass. "Get out." "What?" "Pack your things. Get out of my house." Celeste's expression shifted through shock to fury in seconds. "You're choosing the help over me? Over your future wife?" "I'm choosing my children," Victor said. "Something I should have done the moment you walked through that door." "You need me," Celeste hissed, stepping closer. "You're a mess, Victor. A pathetic, grieving mess who can't even look at his own kids without falling apart. I gave you structure. I gave you purpose. I gave you a reason to keep living." "No," Victor said softly. "You gave me an excuse to keep hiding. There's a difference." Celeste's face twisted into something ugly. "You'll regret this. I'll sue you for breach of promise. I'll tell everyone you're an unfit father. You'll leave." Grace's voice cut through the kitchen like a blade. She stood in the doorway, phone in hand. "Now. Before I show Mr. Ashford the rest of what I found." Victor turned. "The rest?" Grace's expression was granite. "Show him, or I will." Celeste's confidence fractured. For the first time since Victor had met her, she looked afraid. "You have no right." "Show him," Grace repeated. "Like and subscribe before this gets worse." Celeste pulled her phone from her robe pocket with shaking hands. She unlocked it, opened a folder, and thrust it at Victor. "It's not what you think." Victor looked at the screen. Photos filled it. Dozens of them. His house. His art. His wife's jewelry. His children's trust fund documents. Financial statements. Insurance policies. Each image meticulously catalogued and dated. "What is this?" His voice sounded distant to his own ears. "Research," Celeste said quickly. "Just research. For wedding planning. For understanding your assets. It's normal. Victor swiped through the photos. Stopped on one. It was a text message thread between Celeste and an unknown number. The preview text was visible: he's worth more dead than alive, but the kid's trust is locked until they're 18. Working on Plan B. The kitchen tilted. Victor gripped the counter to stay upright. Plan B. It's not, that's out of context. I was joking with a friend. You were planning to kill me. The words came out flat, factual, empty of emotion because emotion would have broken him entirely. No. Victor, I swear. Get out. He looked up, and whatever Celeste saw in his face made her step back. Get out before I call the police and have you arrested for conspiracy to commit murder. Celeste opened her mouth. Closed it. Looked at Grace, then back at Victor. Something calculating moved behind her eyes. You can't prove intent. Those texts are vague. Any lawyer worth their salt will say it was dark humor between friends. Maybe, Grace said quietly. But the forgeries won't be so easy to explain. Celeste went perfectly still. What forgeries? Grace pulled a manila folder from the counter behind her. She'd been holding it this whole time, Victor realized. Waiting. The transfer documents for the Children's Trust Fund. The ones where you forged Victor's signature to move funds into an offshore account. The ones I found in your office yesterday while the children were drying off. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the house seemed to hold its breath. Celeste's face cycled through denial, rage, calculation, and finally resignation in the space of 5 seconds. When she spoke again, her voice was ice. You have no idea what you're giving up, Victor. I could have made you happy. I could have made you forget her. I don't want to forget her, Victor said. She was the best thing that ever happened to me. And so are they. He gestured upward, toward where his children slept. Get out. You have 1 hour. Celeste turned without another word and left the kitchen, her red robe trailing behind her like blood on marble. Her footsteps echoed up the stairs, sharp and final. Victor's legs gave out. He sank onto a kitchen stool, head in his hands. How did I not see it? Grace poured him more coffee. Grief makes people blind. She knew that. She used it. The texts about me dying. I've already forwarded everything to your attorney, Grace said. And to the police. Just in case. Victor looked up at her. This woman who'd worked for his family for 8 years, who'd held his wife's hand during chemo, who'd raised his children while he fell apart, who'd saved them yesterday and protected them today. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I tried, Grace said softly. You weren't ready to hear it. The truth of that settled like stones in his chest. He thought back to the past months, Grace's subtle suggestions that the children needed more time with him, her gentle warnings about Celeste's coldness, her increasing presence in his children's lives. He'd been too buried in his own misery to notice someone was trying to dig him out. I'm sorry, he whispered. Don't apologize to me. Apologize to them. Small footsteps sounded in the hallway. Victor turned to find Daniel and Emma standing in the kitchen doorway, hand in hand, eyes wide. How much had they heard? Daddy? Emma's voice was small. Is the mean lady leaving? Victor's throat closed. He nodded, unable to speak. Forever? Daniel asked. Forever, Victor managed. Emma launched herself at him, small arms wrapping around his neck with surprising strength. Daniel followed more slowly, cautious, as if waiting for disappointment. Victor pulled them both onto his lap, when had he last held them like this, and pressed his face into their hair. They smelled like Grace's lavender shampoo and childhood and second chances. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the space between their small bodies. "I'm so sorry. I forgot how to be your daddy for a while. But I'm going to remember now. I promise." Mama said promises are important, Emma said against his shoulder. Mama was right about everything. They sat like that for a long time, 3 broken pieces fitting together in a way that felt almost whole. Grace moved quietly around them, making breakfast, giving them space, being what she'd always been, the steady heartbeat of a family learning to live again. Like and subscribe, the next part of the story reveals the secret Grace has been hiding. An hour later, Celeste descended the stairs with 3 suitcases and a driver Victor hadn't called. She paused in the foyer, looked back once, and said, "You'll regret this when you're lonely again." Victor, standing with 1 child on each side of him, Grace just behind, felt something settle into place. "I'm not lonely anymore." Celeste left without another word. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like freedom. Emma tugged Victor's hand. "Daddy? Can we look at Mama's pictures today? The ones in the attic?" Victor's breath caught. He'd boxed up Rebecca's photos 6 months ago, unable to look at them, unable to let them go. "Yes, baby. We can look at all of them." "And can Grace look too?" Daniel asked. "She tells the best stories about Mama." Victor glanced at Grace, who stood perfectly still, tears streaming silently down her face. "Yes," he said. "Grace can stay for all of it." They spent that afternoon in the attic, surrounded by photos and memories and dust motes that danced in sunlight. Grace told stories about Rebecca that Victor had never heard, small moments, tender observations, the kind of intimacy that comes from caring for someone during their final days. Emma fell asleep against Victor's chest, one hand clutching a photo of her mother. Daniel leaned against Grace, asking questions about heaven and rain and whether Mama could see them now. And for the first time in 18 months, Victor felt something besides grief. Not happiness, not yet. But hope. The small, fragile kind that takes root in ruins and grows slowly toward light. As the sun set beyond the attic window, Daniel asked the question that had been building all day, "Daddy? Why did you love her? The mean lady?" Victor looked at his son's upturned face, so much like Rebecca's, so trusting despite everything. "I didn't love her," he said honestly. "I loved that she made me forget how sad I was. But forgetting isn't the same as healing. And running away from sadness means running away from you too. I won't do that anymore." Daniel nodded slowly, processing. "Then, Grace says Mama's still with us. In our hearts. Is that true?" Victor pressed his hand against his chest, where grief and love tangled into something permanent. "Yes," he whispered. "That's the truest thing anyone's ever said." But what none of them knew yet, what Grace had been carrying alone for 18 months, was that Rebecca had left more than memories. She'd left instructions. A letter. And a request that would change everything. Grace touched the envelope in her pocket, still sealed, still waiting for the right moment. Soon, she thought. But not today. Today was for healing. Tomorrow was for truth. And truth, as Rebecca had known, was both gift and blade. 3 weeks passed like a held breath slowly released. Victor worked from home now, his office converted into a space where Emma could draw on the floor while he reviewed contracts, where Daniel could ask questions that didn't feel like interruptions. The mansion shed its museum quality and began, tentatively, to feel like a home again. But Grace carried her secret like a stone in her pocket. The envelope, cream-colored, sealed with wax, addressed in Rebecca's shaky final handwriting, waited in her bedroom drawer beneath folded sweaters. "Open this when Victor is ready," Rebecca had whispered 3 days before she died. You'll know when. Was he ready now? Grace watched Victor teach Emma to make pancakes, watched him laugh when Daniel accidentally cracked an egg on his own head instead of the bowl. He looked lighter. Present. Almost healed. But almost wasn't enough. Not for what the letter contained. That afternoon, while Victor took the children to the park, their first real outing as a family in months, Grace sat alone in the kitchen with the envelope in front of her. She'd memorized every curve of Rebecca's handwriting without opening it. The wax seal bore Rebecca's initials, R.A. Rebecca Ashford. A woman who'd known she was dying and had planned accordingly. Grace's phone buzzed. A text from Victor. Daniel just went down the slide for the first time in a year. He's laughing. Real laughing. Thank you for giving me back my life. Her throat tightened. She typed back. That was always yours to reclaim. Another text, coming home in an hour. Grace, we need to talk when the kids go to bed. About your future here. About making this official. You're not just staff anymore. You're family. Family. The word should have warmed her. Instead, it felt like pressure building before a storm. Because family meant honesty. And honesty meant the letter. Like and subscribe, what Grace reveals will change everything. That evening, after dinner and stories and tucking 2 exhausted children into beds that finally felt safe, Grace found Victor in the living room. He'd poured 2 glasses of wine, something she'd never seen him do. The gesture felt significant, ceremonial. Sit, he said gently. Please. Grace sat, but didn't touch the wine. Her hands stayed folded in her lap, the envelope burning in her pocket like unfinished business. I've been thinking, Victor began, settling into the chair across from her. About everything you've done. Everything you've sacrificed. You've raised my children while I fell apart. You saved them from Celeste. You saved me from myself. He leaned forward, earnest. I want to set up a trust fund for you. Full college education coverage if you want to go back to school. A house of your own. Whatever you need. And I want you to stay, officially, as the children's guardian. Not as staff. As family. Grace's vision blurred. It was generous. Impossibly generous. Everything a woman in her position could want. But it wasn't why she'd stayed. Victor, she said softly, I need to tell you something. His expression shifted, reading something in her tone. What's wrong? Grace pulled the envelope from her pocket and placed it on the coffee table between them. Victor's eyes locked onto it, recognizing his wife's handwriting immediately. The color drained from his face. What is that? A letter. From Rebecca. She gave it to me 3 days before she died. She asked me to give it to you when you were ready. Grace's voice remained steady, but her hands shook. I think you're ready now. Victor stared at the envelope like it might explode. What does it say? I don't know. It's sealed. But Victor. Grace took a breath. There's something I need to tell you first. Something Rebecca asked me to keep secret until the right time. The room felt suddenly airless. Victor's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. Tell me. Rebecca knew she was dying 6 months before you did. The doctors told her the cancer was terminal, that treatment might buy time but wouldn't save her. She asked them not to tell you. Grace watched Victor's face crack with each word. She wanted those last 6 months to be about living, not dying. She didn't want you to spend them grieving. She knew. Victor's voice broke. For 6 months. Yes. And she spent those months planning. Making sure the children would be protected. Making sure you would be. Grace gestured to the envelope. That's why she asked me to stay. To watch over all of you. To step in if you forgot how to see them. Victor stood abruptly, pacing to the window. His shoulders shook. She died keeping secrets from me. She died protecting you, Grace corrected gently. There's a difference. Silence stretched between them, broken only by Victor's ragged breathing. Finally, he turned back, eyes red. What else? What else did she ask you to do? Grace's chest tightened. This was the part she dreaded. She asked me to watch you. To make sure that if you started dating again, the person was good for the children. She was worried you'd be so desperate to fill the void that you'd choose wrong. Grace met his eyes. She was right. The truth of it settled like ash. Victor sank back into his chair, head in his hands. She predicted Celeste. She predicted your grief would make you vulnerable. She wanted me to intervene if necessary. You did, Victor whispered. You saved us from my own stupidity. You saved yourselves, Grace said. I just gave you the information you needed. Victor reached for the envelope with trembling hands. He broke the wax seal, it cracked like ice, and pulled out 2 pages of Rebecca's handwriting. Grace watched emotions play across his face as he read. Shock, grief, wonder, pain, and finally, something like peace. Like and subscribe before you miss the letter's secret. When he finished, Victor sat frozen, the pages trembling in his grip. Then he looked up at Grace, and his expression was unreadable. Did you know? He asked hoarsely. Know what? About Daniel. Grace's heart stopped. What about Daniel? Victor handed her the letter with shaking hands. Grace read, and the world tilted. My dearest Victor, if Grace has given you this letter, it means you're finally healing. I'm so proud of you. But there's something you need to know, something I couldn't tell you while I was alive because I was a coward. Daniel isn't yours biologically. I had a brief affair 5 years ago when we were going through that terrible patch. I'm not proud of it. But Daniel is yours in every way that matters. You're the only father he's ever known, the only father he'll ever need. I'm telling you this now because if anything ever happens, if there are medical issues, genetic questions, you need to know the truth. I love you. I love our family. And I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to tell you this while I could still hold your hand through the pain. Rebecca. Grace's hands went numb. She'd had no idea. None. In all those final conversations, all those whispered promises, Rebecca had never mentioned this. I don't understand, Grace whispered. Victor laughed. A broken, jagged sound. Neither do I. She's been dead 18 months and she's still keeping secrets. Victor, I swear to you, I didn't know. I believe you. He stood again, pacing. God, I believe you. But Daniel. Does this change anything? Does this change how I feel about him? He pressed his fists against his forehead. I don't know. I don't know what I feel. Grace stood slowly, approaching him the way you'd approach something wounded. Do you love him less than you did 5 minutes ago? No. But. Do you wish he wasn't yours? No. God, no. But it's different now. Everything's different. Nothing's different, Grace said firmly. Daniel is your son. You raised him. You chose him every day for 5 years. Biology doesn't change that. She lied to me. Victor's voice cracked. The woman I loved, who I thought I knew completely, lied to me for 5 years. She made a mistake and was too afraid to fix it, Grace said. She was human. Flawed. Like all of us. Victor sank onto the couch, the letter crumpled in his fist. What do I do now? Do I tell him? Do I find his biological father? Do I? A small voice cut through the darkness. Tell me what? They both spun toward the doorway. Daniel stood there in his dinosaur pajamas, eyes wide, catching the tail end of a conversation that would break him if he understood it. Like and subscribe, you won't believe what happens next. Victor's face went white. Daniel. Buddy. You're supposed to be asleep. I had a bad dream. About the rain. Daniel stepped into the room, looking between his father and Grace. Why are you sad, Daddy? Why is Grace crying? Grace touched her face, tears she hadn't realized were falling. She wiped them quickly. Just missing your mama, sweetheart. Daniel's expression shifted to something ancient, something no 5-year-old should carry. Is it because of me? Because I look like her and it makes you sad? Victor's breath caught. He crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees in front of his son. No. Never because of you. You and Emma are the only things that make me happy. Do you understand? You're my boy. My son. Nothing will ever change that. Daniel's lower lip trembled. Promise? I promise with my whole heart. Daniel threw his arms around Victor's neck. Victor held him, eyes squeezed shut, rocking slightly. Over Daniel's shoulder, he looked at Grace, and she saw the question in his eyes. What do I do? Grace mouthed back, love him. That's all. After Victor carried Daniel back to bed and stayed until the boy drifted off, he returned to find Grace still in the living room, Rebecca's letter folded neatly on the table. I'm not telling him, Victor said quietly. Not now. Maybe not ever. He doesn't need that burden. That's your choice to make, Grace said. Is it? Or is it his right to know? He has a right to a father who loves him unconditionally. You're giving him that. Grace stood. The rest is just details. Victor looked at the letter again. She knew I'd forgive her. Even now. Even with this. Is that arrogant or just, knowing me too well? Both, Grace said gently. That's what 18 years of marriage looks like. Victor nodded slowly. Then, will you stay? Even knowing this? Even knowing what a mess we are? Grace smiled sadly. I've always known what a mess you are. That's why Rebecca asked me to stay. Thank you, Victor whispered. For everything. Grace left him there with his wife's ghost and his complicated truths. Upstairs, she checked on both children, Emma sprawled like a starfish, Daniel curled tight as a fist. Both breathing. Both safe. Both loved. But as she returned to her own room, Grace felt the weight of another secret pressing down. Because Rebecca's letter had mentioned medical issues and genetic questions. And 3 weeks ago, Daniel had complained of stomach pains that Grace had dismissed as nerves from Celeste's departure. But what if it was something more? What if Daniel needed his biological father's medical history to survive? Grace looked at her phone, at the number she'd found buried in Rebecca's old contacts months ago. A name, Marcus Chin. A note beside it, Daniel's father. Emergency only. Was this an emergency? Or was she overreacting? Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she'd take Daniel to the doctor. Just to be safe. She had no way of knowing that by tomorrow, Daniel would collapse. And everything would change again. Daniel collapsed during breakfast. One moment he was pushing scrambled eggs around his plate, the next he was on the floor, convulsing, his small body rigid with pain. Emma screamed. Victor's coffee mug shattered against tile. Grace was already moving, phone in hand, dialing emergency services before her knees hit the ground beside the boy. "Daniel, look at me. Stay with me, sweetheart." She turned him on his side, monitoring his breathing while barking their address to the dispatcher. Victor knelt opposite her, frozen, his hands hovering uselessly over his son's trembling frame. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes that felt like hours. Paramedics swarmed the kitchen, questions, equipment, efficient hands that knew what to do while Victor could only watch. They stabilized Daniel, loaded him onto a stretcher. Grace climbed into the ambulance without asking permission. Victor followed with Emma clinging to his neck, her face buried in his shoulder. At the hospital, doctors descended with clipboards and concerned expressions. They ran tests while Daniel drifted in and out of consciousness, his small hand gripping Grace's with surprising strength. Victor paced the waiting room, Emma silent in a plastic chair, coloring with crayons a nurse had provided. She drew the same thing over and over, a boy in a hospital bed with wings above him. Like and subscribe, Daniel's diagnosis will break your heart. 3 hours later, Dr. Patel emerged from the examination room, his expression carefully neutral in the way doctors practice when delivering bad news. "Mr. Ashford. May I speak with you privately?" Grace stood. "Whatever you need to say, you can say in front of me. I'm family." Dr. Patel glanced at Victor, who nodded. "Grace stays. Daniel has acute kidney failure. We're running additional tests, but his left kidney appears to be severely damaged, possibly from a congenital defect that's been asymptomatic until now. His right kidney is compensating, but barely." Dr. Patel's words came faster, clinical. "We need a complete medical history, both parents, grandparents, any genetic conditions. And we need to start looking for a donor immediately." The floor dropped away beneath Victor's feet. "A donor? A kidney transplant? Given his age and condition, the sooner we find a match, the better his chances." Dr. Patel pulled out a tablet. "I'll need to test you first, Mr. Ashford. As his father, you're the most likely match." Grace's hand found Victor's arm, steadying him. "Do it now," Victor said. "Test me now." They drew blood while Emma watched with wide eyes. Grace distracted her with stories about brave knights and dragons, but the little girl's gaze kept drifting to the needle in her father's arm. 30 minutes later, Dr. Patel returned with results that confirmed what Rebecca's letter had already revealed. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ashford. You're not a match. Not even close." Dr. Patel frowned at his tablet. "In fact, the genetic markers suggest, well, it suggests Daniel may have been adopted or—" "He's my son," Victor said firmly. "Biology doesn't change that." Dr. Patel's expression softened. "Of course. But for medical purposes, we need his biological father's information. Genetic relatives are more likely to be compatible donors." Victor looked at Grace. She saw the question in his eyes, the fear, the desperation. She thought of the name in Rebecca's phone, Marcus Chen. Emergency only. This was an emergency. "I might have that information," Grace said quietly. Rebecca left contact details. For situations exactly like this. Like and subscribe to find out if they save Daniel. Grace made the call from a hospital corridor that smelled of antiseptic and suffering. The phone rang 4 times before a man answered, his voice professionally pleasant. "Marcus Chen speaking. Mr. Chen, my name is Grace. I'm calling about Rebecca Ashford." Silence. Then, "Rebecca? Is she okay?" "She passed away. 18 months ago. Cancer." More silence, heavier this time. "I'm sorry to hear that. We hadn't spoken in years. Why are you calling?" Grace took a breath. Your son needs a kidney transplant. The line went dead quiet. Grace could hear breathing, could almost feel the shock radiating through the connection. Finally, my son. Daniel. He's 5 years old. Rebecca never told you because she chose to stay with her husband, to raise Daniel as his. But he's sick now, Mr. Chen. He's dying. And we need your help. Does his father know about me? He knows. And he's standing right here asking me to beg you to get tested. Please. Another pause. Where are you? Grace gave him the hospital address. Marcus Chen arrived 2 hours later, a tall man in his late 30s, Asian features, dark hair graying at the temples. He looked nothing like Daniel except for the eyes. Those eyes were identical. Victor met him in the lobby. Grace watched them size each other up, the husband who'd raised another man's child, and the biological father who'd never known that child existed. It should have been hostile. Instead, it was just sad. Thank you for coming, Victor said, extending his hand. Marcus took it. How is he? Scared. Weak. Asking for his sister. Victor's voice cracked. He doesn't know about you. I'd like to keep it that way. Understood. Marcus looked past Victor toward the pediatric wing. Can I see him? Just to see him before they take my blood. Victor hesitated, then nodded. They walked together down sterile corridors, two men connected by a woman who'd loved them both in different ways, at different times, for different reasons. Grace followed at a distance with Emma, who'd fallen asleep against her shoulder. Through the window of Daniel's room, they watched the boy sleep. Machines beeped. For drips fed medicine into his small arm. He looked impossibly fragile, impossibly young. He has her smile, Marcus whispered. Rebecca's smile. He has her courage too, Victor said. And her stubbornness. Marcus turned to look at Victor directly. You've been a good father to him. I can see that. In the way the nurses talk about you, in the drawings on his wall. You're his dad. I'm just genetic material. You're potentially his salvation, Victor corrected. That makes you more than material. They tested Marcus immediately. Dr. Patel called it a miracle when the results came back 6 hours later, a perfect match. Daniel would need surgery within 48 hours, but they'd found their donor. The boy would live. Victor broke down in the hallway, his back against the wall, sliding down until he sat on cold tile. Grace sat beside him, saying nothing, just being present while he shook with relief and grief and gratitude all tangled together. She knew, Victor whispered. Rebecca knew this might happen. That's why she kept Marcus's information. Why she told me the truth in that letter. She was protecting Daniel even after death. She was protecting all of you, Grace said. Victor looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. How do I thank a dead woman for saving my son? You live well. You love them fiercely. You remember her accurately, flaws and all. Grace squeezed his hand. That's how. Like and subscribe, the next part of the story shows the surgery's shocking outcome. Marcus stayed through the night, keeping vigil outside Daniel's room but never going in. Victor brought him coffee around midnight. They sat together in uncomfortable plastic chairs, not speaking, just existing in the strange fraternity of men who loved the same child for different reasons. Will you tell him? Marcus asked finally. When he's older? Victor considered. I don't know. Maybe. If he asks. If he needs medical information again. But right now? Right now he needs stability. He needs to know his father isn't going anywhere. You're a better man than I am, Marcus said quietly. No. I'm just a man who almost lost everything and barely learned in time what mattered. Victor looked at Marcus. You're giving him your kidney. That's not nothing. It's everything, Marcus corrected. But it doesn't make me his father. You are. You'll always be. In the morning, they prepped both Daniel and Marcus for surgery. Victor explained to Daniel that a kind man was giving him a special gift, a second chance. Daniel, groggy with pre-op medication, asked only one question: will it hurt? Yes, Victor said honestly. But we'll be here when you wake up. Me, Grace, and Emma. We won't leave you. Promise? I promise with my whole heart. They wheeled Daniel away. Victor stood in the corridor until his son disappeared through surgical doors, then turned to find Marcus being prepped in an adjacent room. The man who created Daniel was about to sacrifice part of himself to save him. Grace touched Victor's arm. Both your sons are fighters. They'll both come through this. Victor blinked. Both my sons. Marcus may not have raised him, but he's choosing him now. That makes them connected. Which makes him family. Complicated, messy family, but family nonetheless. 6 hours later, Dr. Patel emerged with exhausted triumph. Both surgeries were successful. Daniel's body is accepting the kidney. Marcus is stable and resting. It's going to be a long recovery, but they're both going to be fine. Victor's knees buckled. Grace caught him. Emma, who'd been silent for hours, finally spoke. Daniel's not going to heaven with Mama. No, baby, Victor whispered, pulling her close. Daniel's staying right here with us. Emma nodded, satisfied, and went back to her drawings. This time she drew 4 people and 2 angels, one watching from above, one standing beside the hospital bed, giving part of themselves away. Children, Victor thought, understood sacrifice better than adults ever could. They lived it every day in smaller ways, sharing toys, giving up the last cookie, loving people who sometimes forgot to love them back. Daniel understood it too. When he woke from surgery, groggy and hurting, his first words were, "Did the kind man die?" "No," Victor assured him, brushing hair from his son's forehead. "He's sleeping in the next room. He's going to be just fine. Can I say thank you? When you're both stronger." "Yes." Daniel closed his eyes again, content. Victor sat beside him, holding his small hand, marveling at the resilience of children, the mercy of strangers, and the foresight of a wife who protected her family from beyond the grave. But in the hallway, Marcus Chen sat alone, staring at his bandaged abdomen, and wondered what his life might have looked like if Rebecca had chosen differently 5 years ago. If he'd known. If he'd fought for her. If. Grace found him there an hour later. "He wants to meet you tomorrow. Daniel. He wants to say thank you." Marcus's eyes filled. "I don't know if I can. If I see him, really see him, and then have to walk away." "Then don't walk away," Grace said simply. "Victor's not asking you to disappear. He's asking you not to confuse the boy. There's a difference." "What does that mean?" "It means maybe you can be Uncle Marcus. A friend of the family. Someone who cares from a distance but stays connected." Grace sat beside him. "Daniel needs a father. He has one. But he could use another person who loves him. The world's too hard for children to have too much love." Marcus considered this. Finally, he nodded. "Uncle Marcus. I can do that." And so a new configuration formed, imperfect, unconventional, held together by a dead woman's wisdom and a living child's need. Not a traditional family, but a family nonetheless. The kind built by choice rather than biology. The kind that, against all odds, might actually survive. Daniel's recovery room became a universe of its own, monitors beeping rhythms of survival, for poles standing sentinel, antiseptic smell mixing with the flowers Grace brought daily. Victor hadn't left the hospital in 4 days. He slept in a recliner that destroyed his spine, ate cafeteria food that tasted like cardboard, and watched his son heal one painful breath at a time. Marcus visited twice daily, always during designated hours, always bringing something small, a toy car, a comic book, a balloon shaped like a superhero. Daniel called him the kidney man with the casual acceptance children have for the miraculous. He didn't question why a stranger would give him such a gift. He simply said thank you and moved on, the way kids do when adults handle the complicated parts. On the 5th day, Daniel's doctor cleared him to receive visitors beyond immediate family. Emma burst through the door first, a tornado of relief and pent-up energy. She'd been staying with a neighbor, away from hospitals and sickness, protected from the reality that her brother had almost died. "You're not dead," she announced, climbing carefully onto Daniel's bed. "Nope," Daniel said, grinning despite the pain medication making his words slow. "I got a new kidney from the kidney man. Now I'm like a superhero. Half me, half him." Emma considered this seriously. "Which half?" "The inside half," Daniel said. "The important part." Grace watched from the doorway, her heart simultaneously breaking and healing. These children had lost their mother, nearly lost their father to grief, survived Celeste's cruelty, and now faced surgical trauma, yet they still believed in superheroes. Still found wonder in survival. That kind of resilience didn't come from genetics. It came from being loved fiercely enough to feel safe being vulnerable. Like and subscribe. The next visitor changes everything. That afternoon, a woman Victor didn't recognize appeared at Daniel's door. She was in her 60s, elegantly dressed, her face kind but worn in the way that speaks of old sorrows. She knocked softly on the doorframe. "Mr. Ashford. My name is Helen Chen. I'm Marcus's mother." Her voice carried a slight tremor. "May I come in?" Victor exchanged glances with Grace, who nodded slightly. "Of course." Helen entered slowly, her eyes finding Daniel immediately. She stopped, one hand pressed to her chest, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Oh my stars. He has Rebecca's nose. And Marcus's eyes. He's..." She couldn't finish. Daniel, alert despite medication, watched her with curiosity. "Are you the kidney man's mom?" "I am, sweetheart." Helen approached the bed carefully, as if afraid sudden movement might shatter the moment. My son gave you something very precious. I wanted to meet the brave boy who received it." "It doesn't hurt as much today," Daniel offered generously. "Tomorrow the doctor says I can walk more. Grace says walking makes you heal faster." Helen looked at Grace, then at Victor. "My son told me everything. About Rebecca. About the choices made. About how you've raised this beautiful child as your own." Her voice strengthened. "I want you to know something, Mr. Ashford. What you've done, choosing to love a child regardless of biology, that's the mark of a true father. My son gave Daniel a kidney. But you gave him a life. There's no comparison." Victor's throat closed. He managed only a nod. Helen turned back to Daniel. "Would it be all right if I visited you sometimes? When you're feeling better? I make excellent cookies, and I'm told I'm a decent storyteller." Daniel looked at his father for permission. Victor, seeing the hope in the older woman's face, a grandmother who just discovered a grandson she'd never known existed, found himself nodding again. "Cookies sound good," Daniel said diplomatically. Helen laughed through tears, squeezed his hand gently, and left before her composure cracked entirely. In the hallway, Victor heard her sobbing. Grace excused herself to follow. She found Helen leaning against the wall, shoulders shaking. Grace stood beside her silently until the storm passed. "I'm sorry," Helen finally said, wiping her face. "It's just. Marcus never married. Never had children. I'd accepted I'd never be a grandmother. And now suddenly there's this perfect little boy with my son's eyes, and I can't. I don't have the right to." "You have the right to love him," Grace said firmly. "Daniel can't have too many people who love him. The world doesn't work that way. His father might feel differently. His father is trying to do what's best for Daniel. Right now, that means accepting help from people who genuinely care." Grace touched Helen's arm. "Marcus saved Daniel's life. That earned him, and you, a place in this story. Not as replacement parents, but as extended family. If you can accept that boundary, I think Victor will let you in." Helen studied Grace's face. "You're remarkable, you know. The way you hold this family together." "They hold each other," Grace said. "I just remind them when they forget. Like and subscribe to see how this family rebuilds." That evening, after Emma had been collected by the neighbor and Daniel had drifted into medicated sleep, Victor and Marcus sat in the hospital cafeteria nursing terrible coffee. It had become their ritual, late-night conversations in fluorescent lighting, processing the impossible situation they'd been thrown into. "My mother visited today," Marcus said. "I know. She was kind. She wants to be part of his life. I told her it wasn't my decision to make." Marcus studied his coffee cup. "But Victor, I want you to know, I'm not trying to take anything from you. I'm not trying to replace you or confuse Daniel. If you want me to disappear after he's healed, I will." Victor was quiet for a long time. Finally, "Rebecca used to say that family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up. You showed up, Marcus. When it mattered most, you showed up and you literally gave part of yourself to save my son. How do I ask someone like that to disappear?" "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying, maybe Uncle Marcus and Grandma Helen can be part of Daniel's life. Not in a way that confuses him or threatens the family structure, but in a way that adds to it." Victor rubbed his face. "God knows these kids need all the love they can get. And maybe I need to learn that sharing that love doesn't diminish it." Marcus's eyes glistened. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. There are going to be boundaries. Rules. I'm still his father. If he ever asks about biology, I'll tell him the truth, but that conversation happens on my timeline, when he's ready. Understood? And if you ever try to undermine me or take more than what's offered." "I won't," Marcus said quickly. "I promise you, Victor. I won't." They sat in silence, two men who should have been enemies, bound together by love for the same child and respect for a woman who'd loved them both. 3 weeks later, Daniel came home. The mansion that had felt like a mausoleum a month ago now burst with life. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator, Daniel's laughter echoed through hallways, Grace's presence steadied everything like the foundation beneath a house. Marcus visited on Sundays, bringing Helen with him. She taught Emma to bake cookies while Marcus played video games with Daniel, careful of the healing incision. Victor watched from doorways, learning to share space that had felt too empty alone. One Sunday afternoon, Daniel approached Victor with a question that had clearly been building. "Dad? Why does Uncle Marcus have my eyes?" Victor's heart stopped. Grace, folding laundry nearby, paused. Marcus, in the kitchen with Helen, went still. Victor knelt to his son's level. "What do you mean, buddy?" "Emma said Uncle Marcus has eyes like mine. And Grandma Helen says I smile like Uncle Marcus." Why do I look like them if they're not my real family? The moment stretched. Victor looked at Grace, who gave him the smallest nod. Tell him the truth. Age appropriate, but truthful. You know how some kids are adopted? Victor began carefully. How sometimes moms and dads choose children who weren't born to them, but love them just the same. Daniel nodded. Well, you weren't adopted. But your mom and I, we had some complicated grown-up stuff happen before you were born. Uncle Marcus is actually your biological father. That means you came from him. But I'm your dad. The one who raised you and loves you and will always be here. Do you understand the difference? Daniel processed this with the seriousness of a 5-year-old contemplating the universe. So Uncle Marcus made me, but you're my daddy. Exactly. And he gave me his kidney because we match. Yes. That's pretty cool, Daniel decided. I have 2 dads. Like a superhero with 2 secret identities. Victor laughed, a real laugh, surprised and relieved. Yeah, buddy. Just like that. Daniel hugged him quickly and ran back to his video game, the revelation already integrated into his worldview with the flexibility of childhood. Emma, eavesdropping from the stairs, followed him without comment. Marcus appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down his face. You told him? He asked. I wasn't going to lie. And he's, okay. He thinks it's cool, Victor said, shaking his head in wonder. Kids are remarkable. Marcus crossed the room and did something unexpected. He hugged Victor. Tight. Grateful. Thank you for being the father I couldn't be. Thank you for loving him first. Victor hugged back, awkward but genuine. Thank you for saving him when I couldn't. Like and subscribe. The final part of the story will make you believe in second chances. That night, Victor tucked both children into bed. Emma first, who demanded 3 stories and extra kisses. Then Daniel, who looked small in his bed despite being home from the hospital for weeks. Dad? Daniel said as Victor reached the door. I'm glad Uncle Marcus gave me his kidney. But I'm more glad you're my dad. Victor's vision blurred. Me too, buddy. Me too. Downstairs, Grace waited with tea and the comfortable silence of someone who'd witnessed miracles and knew better than to over-explain them. They sat together in the living room that had once felt like a tomb and now felt like a sanctuary. You did good today, Grace said quietly. We all did good, Victor corrected. This whole mess of a family, we're doing good. Rebecca would be proud. Rebecca engineered all of this from beyond the grave. Of course she'd be proud. Victor smiled sadly. She was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Outside, autumn rain began to fall, but this time, no children stood locked in it. This time, everyone was inside, warm and safe and chosen. And somewhere, perhaps, Rebecca Ashford watched her impossible family thrive in ways she'd hoped but couldn't guarantee. Because love, it turned out, was the only inheritance that mattered. The only gift that multiplied when shared. 6 months had passed since Daniel's surgery, and the first morning of spring arrived with gentle insistence. Victor woke to sounds he'd forgotten could exist in his home, Emma singing off-key in the bathroom, Daniel's footsteps thundering down the hallway, Grace's laughter drifting up from the kitchen where breakfast smells promised normalcy. He dressed slowly, studying his reflection. The man in the mirror looked different from the one who'd signed papers while his children froze in rain. That man had been a ghost haunting his own life. This one was present, scarred, but healing. Downstairs, organized chaos greeted him. Emma had convinced Grace to let her flip pancakes, resulting in batter splattered across countertops. Daniel sat at the kitchen island, doing homework with the focused determination of a child who'd learned life was fragile and precious. Marcus sat beside him, helping with math problems, while Helen packed school lunches with the precision of a woman making up for lost time. This was family now, unconventional, complicated, held together by choice rather than obligation. Victor had stopped trying to explain it to outsiders. How do you explain that your son's biological father has Sunday dinner at your table? That his grandmother babysits while you work? That the maid who saved everyone has become the glue binding broken pieces? You don't. You just live it. Dad. Emma called, noticing him in the doorway. Grace says we can go to the park after school if you come with us. Will you? 6 months ago, that question would have been met with excuses about meetings, about contracts, about anything except the truth, that he was too afraid of joy to participate in it. Now, he simply said, yes. Emma cheered. Daniel looked up from his homework and smiled, that quiet smile that meant more than words. Marcus met Victor's eyes across the kitchen and nodded acknowledgement. 2 fathers, 1 son, learning to share space without competing. Like and subscribe, witness how love rebuilds everything. That afternoon, Victor kept his promise. The park was alive with spring, children shrieking on swings, dogs chasing frisbees, couples walking hand in hand. Victor pushed Emma on the swings while Daniel navigated monkey bars with Marcus spotting beneath him, protective of the surgical scar that had healed but would never disappear. Grace sat on a bench nearby, watching her assembled family with something like contentment. She'd given up searching for another position. This was where she belonged, not as staff, but as the woman who'd held the center when everything threatened to collapse. Higher, Daddy. Emma demanded, and Victor obliged, pushing until she soared, her laughter splitting the sky like birdsong. He thought of Rebecca watching from wherever the dead watch from. Did she see this? Did she know her desperate planning, her final letters, her impossible requests had worked? That the family she protected from beyond the grave was not just surviving but thriving? Daniel appeared beside him, breathing hard from play, his cheeks flushed. Dad? Can we visit Mama today? Victor's heart clenched, but not with the sharp pain of before. Now it was gentler, the ache of missing someone deeply loved, but with gratitude for having loved them at all. Yes, buddy. We can go after dinner. That evening, they drove to the cemetery as a unit, Victor, Daniel, Emma, and Grace. Marcus and Helen had offered to come but Victor had declined gently. Some rituals belonged to the original configuration, the people who'd grieved first and longest. Rebecca's headstone was simple granite engraved with her name, dates, and a line from a poem she'd loved, "Love doesn't end, it simply transforms." Emma placed fresh flowers, daisies, Rebecca's favorite. Daniel sat cross-legged on the grass, talking to his mother about school and his new kidney and how Uncle Marcus taught him card tricks. Victor knelt, one hand on the cool stone. "We're okay, Becca. I know you were worried we wouldn't be, but we are. The kids are thriving. Grace is family now. And I." He paused, voice thick. "I'm finally the father you needed me to be. I'm sorry it took so long. Like and subscribe, the ending will restore your faith." Grace stood back, giving them privacy, but Emma called to her. "Grace, come tell Mama about the cookies we made." Grace approached, kneeling beside Emma. She touched the headstone gently, the way you touch something sacred. "Thank you," she whispered, too soft for the children to hear. "For trusting me. For knowing I'd keep them safe. I hope I've done right by you." A breeze moved through the cemetery, warm and unexpected, rustling leaves with a sound almost like laughter. Grace chose to believe it was Rebecca's approval. On the drive home, Daniel asked the question that had been building for months, "Dad? Do you think you'll ever get married again?" Victor glanced in the rearview mirror at his son's serious face. Maybe someday. If I meet someone who loves you and Emma as much as they love me. Someone who shows up not because they have to, but because they want to. Why do you ask? Because I think Grace should stay forever, Daniel said simply. She makes everything better. Emma nodded enthusiastically. Grace is the best. Better than the mean lady. Victor met Grace's eyes. She sat in the passenger seat, tears streaming silently down her face, overwhelmed by the casual acceptance of children who didn't know how rare unconditional love actually was. Grace isn't going anywhere, Victor promised. She's family. Good, Emma said, satisfied. Can we have ice cream? The conversation shifted to ice cream flavors and whether dogs dream and other profound questions only children ask. But Grace's hand found Victor's on the center console, squeezed once in gratitude, and let go. That night, after teeth were brushed and stories read and both children tucked safely into beds that no longer felt like places they might be abandoned from, Victor found Grace in the kitchen. She was cleaning counters that were already clean, the way she did when processing emotions too large for words. Thank you, he said quietly. For everything. For saving us when we couldn't save ourselves. Grace set down her cloth. You saved yourselves, Victor. I just reminded you what you were fighting for. Still. I don't know how to repay. You don't repay love, Grace interrupted gently. You just pass it forward. Teach your children to show up for people the way we showed up for each other. That's payment enough. Victor nodded, understanding settling deep in his bones. This was what Rebecca had known, that family wasn't biology, wasn't marriage certificates, wasn't even blood. It was choosing to show up, day after day, when leaving would be easier. It was Grace letting children in from rain. Marcus giving his kidney. Helen bringing cookies. Victor finally putting down his papers and being present. It was messy and imperfect and exactly what they needed. Upstairs, Daniel and Emma slept peacefully, dreaming whatever children who've survived storms dream. Probably something about superheroes and cookies and families that looked nothing like television but felt like home anyway. In the morning, they'd wake to pancakes and laughter and another ordinary day in a life stitched together from extraordinary choices. Marcus would visit Sunday afternoon. Helen would teach Emma piano on Tuesday. Grace would be there every moment in between, steady as gravity, loving without conditions. And Victor? Victor would be present for all of it. The homework and skinned knees and bedtime stories and slow healing of hearts that had nearly forgotten how to beat. Because he'd learned what Rebecca had tried to tell him all along, that wealth measured in bank accounts means nothing. That power and prestige are dust. But showing up for the people you love. Teaching your children through actions that they matter more than empires. That's the only fortune that lasts. That's the only legacy worth leaving. Outside, spring rain began to fall. But this time, everyone was inside. Warm, safe, chosen, and whole.